be listening to a word he was saying at those fancy White House receptions that they would often have. As he gave that big smile and would greet people, everyone else seemed to be so concerned with what they had to say and seemed to not pay attention to what he was saying. So one evening he decided to have a little fun. Each person that came up to him with an extended hand at the next White House reception, he flashed that big smile and he said, "I murdered my grandmother this morning." The very first person he said that to said, "How lovely." The next one commented, "That's just splendid, Mr. President. Continue on with your great work," another said. Someone even said, "We're so proud of what you've done." Nobody was listening to what he was saying except for one foreign diplomat. When the president leaned in and said, "I murdered my grandmother this morning," the diplomat responded, "I'm sure she had it coming."
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of a funny story, but I think also kind of true, unfortunately, about the world we live in. We are not very good at listening. Nobody seemed to be listening to President Roosevelt, and maybe you are thinking to yourself, nobody seems to really be listening to me or to anybody. We are living in this world where everybody's opinions seem to matter so much. We want to tell everybody our opinions so much. Which is a shame because listening is such a foundational part, it seems, to the pattern of life. I mean, we even listen before we are aware of it. From within the womb, an unborn child is already hearing the voices of their parents. And after birth, and the child spends the next a few months hearing the words, absorbing the words and the sounds and the songs of their parents, and pretty soon they are echoing those back to their parents, one imperfect syllable at a time. Those of you who have mastered a foreign language, I have never been able to do that. Maybe it's because I'm not a good listener. Know how important it is to hear the language spoken by others so that you can reproduce it accurately. Boy, wasn't our worship today so wonderful? Thank you all for leading us. If you want to be a good musician, what do? You spend time listening, right, to other good musicians. And it rubs off on you, inspires you, teaches you how to do things in music, to make beautiful music. Psychologist and marriage researcher John Gottman says one of the leading gauges for measuring a happy marriage is whether spouses allow themselves, listen now, to be influenced by the other person. Which means, he says, the couple is listening to each other because our choices and actions involve following ears, following your ears. Apparently, listening is important in marriage. Who knew? These are just a few examples, right, of the many we could give of how listening is foundational to the pattern of life. The Bible testifies to it too. We get this really cool picture of the primeval universe right there at the beginning of Genesis, and we learn that it is formless and void, but somehow it seems to have an ear because the first action is to listen to the voice that pierces the darkness. God commands light, and the cosmos hears and obeys, and through its acts of listening, order and harmony come into that darkness. And then after God creates the first humans, their very first act is to just listen to the blessing, be fruitful and multiply. This is a gift for you. Take care of it, this garden. The centerpiece of Israel's prayer life, remember we just studied it a couple weeks ago in our Fixer Upper series, the Shema begins with the word what? Hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. The Lord is one. In fact, the Hebrew word Shema literally means hear. This was their daily prayer every morning, every night. They had this focus from dawn until dusk to listen to God. Listening is the first act, you could arguably say, of the disciples as they follow Jesus' instructions to cast their nets and catch all those fish. And then they listen as they drop their nets and follow Jesus when he calls. And then as Jesus continues to do his ministry with his disciples, he urges them time and again, he who has an ear, let him hear. Paul declares in Romans 10, faith comes from what we hear. These are just a few of the over 150 times in Scripture it tells us of the importance of listening. It is clear, listening is a foundational pattern to life, especially our spiritual lives. But judging by how poorly we do it in our society today, I wonder if we have forgotten how foundational it is. I have been reading a book over the past few weeks that is called The Listening Life by Adam McHugh. I don't know if any of you have read it. If you have not, I would highly recommend it. The Listening Life by Adam McHugh. I'd like to read you a few paragraphs. And I'm going to read several sections. I wasn't just being lazy in my sermon prep this week, but I'm going to read you several times from this book because it's good stuff. I just thought you should hear it how he says it. So I want to read you first a few paragraphs where he describes how we've lost this foundational view of listening and the consequences that come with that. He writes, somewhere along the way, we started to violate the natural order of things. Speaking our minds and asserting ourselves has taken priority over listening. We interrupt someone else because we are convinced we already know what he or she is going to say. We begin to take up more space than we allow for others. We consider ourselves experts on topics without anything more to learn. We tell God what to give rather than asking what God wants to give. We view others as projects rather than people with unique stories to be heard. We consider our great Christian task to be preaching rather than assuming the listening posture of a servant. We speak volumes, but we listen in snippets. We build lives that shelter us from having to truly listen. We may move into churches and neighborhoods and friendship circles full of people whose views parallel our own, avoiding the dissonance created by contrasting voices, by constructing theological and social echo chambers. We crystallize our beliefs and cease to ask questions. What the Bible portrays as a household of faith instead becomes a scattering of encampments. People who warm themselves by their own fires, whoop with their own war cries, listen solely to their appointed leaders, and only interact with the other camps when firing arrows. I think that's pretty accurate. He wrote that back in 2016. I think it's even more accurate today, 2023. We speak volumes, but we listen in snippets. And we need to learn how to listen better because all the talking in the world will not make our relationships what we want them to be. We have been in this series, Fixer Upper, to try to improve, remodel our relationships. We know that no relationship is perfect. They're all fixer-uppers because none of us are perfect. So far, we've looked at how to improve our relationships by our words that we say. A few Sabbaths ago, we talked about being present, being there. Today, we've got to take a close look at the priority of listening. So, maybe a good place to start would be to say we need to do a better job of listening to God. Now, we could do a whole sermon on what it means to listen to God, the various ways He reveals Himself, speaks to us, maybe sometimes how it's hard for us to know when God is really speaking or not. We do not have that time today. We could do a whole series on just what it means to hear God speak. So I'd like to just give you one word, one concept to ponder when it comes to listening to God, when it comes to listening to Him better. That one word is silence. Silence. It's a word, a concept that we learn about as we read a prophet who is desperate to hear from God. Prophet Elijah in 1 Kings. If you have your Bibles and want to go to 1 Kings 19, it'll also be on the screen. We're going to go there in a second. If there was ever anyone who seemed to be good at obeying and listening to God, it was Elijah. He even listened and obeyed God when God commanded him to do that weird thing, an unappetizing thing of eating the food that the ravens bring, right? He takes God at his word when he announces a famine will come and trusts that he will bring the rain. And then, of course, there's that epic showdown at Mount Carmel where Elijah tells the prophets of Baal, you make an altar to your so-called God, and I'll make an altar to mine, and we'll see who's the true God. Elijah puts his trust in God, and God comes through with this pyrotechnic performance that's like straight out of a superhero movie. Fire from heaven consumes the altar, and leaving no doubt in anyone's mind who the true God is. But just one chapter after that, Elijah is on a different mountain, no longer Mount Carmel, now Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai.